Hi, friends. I'm Bob Dyer, the founder of Christian Educators Hub and the director of Biblical Worldview at Trinity Christian Academy in Addison, Texas. Well, I want to welcome you to this series, Foundations of Faithful Teaching. And I want to begin this series with something that I believe every Christian educator has to settle in their heart. What we are doing in Christian education matters deeply, not symbolically, not nostalgically, not institutionally. It matters spiritually because education is never just about information. It's always about formation. Every classroom is shaping how students see reality. Every lesson is teaching students what is true, what matters, what a human being is, and what success means, and ultimately what life is for. And whether people realize it or not, every educational system is built upon a worldview. So, one of the greatest misconceptions in education is the belief that students are shaped primarily by curriculum. Now, curriculum matters, content matters, academic rigor matters, but students are often shaped just as deeply by the character, consistency, convictions, and emotional posture of the adults leading them. And that is especially true in Christian education, because Christian education isn't simply the transfer of information, it's the formation of people. Students are constantly learning from the adults around them. They notice everything. They notice how we as teachers respond to pressure, how they treat difficult students, whether their faith appears authentic, whether truth is spoken graciously, whether integrity actually matters, whether Christ seems real in everyday life. So in many ways, students are asking a silent question every day. What does Christianity actually look like in real life? And educators answer that question constantly, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. And that's why teaching is never merely academic. It's deeply personal and deeply spiritual. We look at scripture, and Ezra, chapter 7, verse 10, gives us one of the clearest models for educators in all of scripture. Here's what it says: For Ezra had set his heart to study the law of the Lord and to do it and to teach his statutes and rules in Israel. So notice the order again: study, do, teach. Not simply study, teach. Christian education becomes hollow when truth is spoken professionally, but not pursued personally. Now, this doesn't mean educators must pretend to be spiritually flawless. In fact, students often connect more deeply with humble authenticity than polished perfection. But it does mean educators have to take their own spiritual formation seriously. Because eventually, students can sense when Christianity is merely institutional language rather than genuine conviction. And in today's culture, authenticity matters enormously. Students are surrounded by performance constantly. Their curated identities, filtered lives, manufactured branding, and what they often long for is someone real. someone grounded, someone wise, someone steady who genuinely believes what they teach. And that's why Christian educators have to remember this. Who you are teaches as loudly as what you say. Jesus emphasized this idea repeatedly. If you look at Luke 6:40, he says, everyone, when he is fully trained, will be like his teacher. Now that verse should both encourage and sober us, because students don't merely absorb information, they absorb models. They're observing how us as adults handle disappointment, respond to criticism, navigate conflict. Are we humble? Do we demonstrate courage and show compassion and pursue truth? Because students will carry those observations for years beyond the information. And many adults today can still vividly remember teachers who shaped their lives. There's a good possibility that you teach because of somebody like that. Sometimes those teachers shaped them positively, sometimes negatively, but rarely neutrally. Teaching leaves an imprint. That's why Christian educators have to resist the temptation to compartmentalize faith. Faith can't merely appear during Bible class or chapel. Students should see that Christianity affects relationships, speech, leadership, decision-making, integrity, work ethic, emotional responses, compassion, courage. It's a litany of things. And Christian education is incarnational. In other words, students should encounter truth embodied through faithful people. Not perfectly, but genuinely. And this becomes especially important in difficult moments. Anyone can sound spiritual when things are easy, but students learn a great deal by observing how educators handle stress, pressure, frustration, or disappointment, especially through a long year. Moments of difficulty often reveal what truly shapes us. And that's why Christian educators have to prioritize their own walk with Christ. Not merely for personal benefit, but because students are watching constantly. And one of the greatest gifts educators can offer students is spiritual consistency. Not performance, but consistency. Steady faithfulness over time. And so, if you look at this idea in Romans 12:2, the Bible speaks directly to that idea. Don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Notice that transformation. That transformation begins with the mind. Why? Well, because what we believe shapes how we live. Ideas have consequences. Worldviews produce cultures. Beliefs shape behavior. And our students are being discipled every single day, not just by parents, not just by churches, not just by schools, but by social media. There's entertainment, algorithms, peers and influencers, politics, advertising, technology, all influencing our kids. And this culture we live in is constantly catechizing them. If you've seen one of the videos here at the Christian Educators Hub, you've noticed I talk about don't fear catechesis. That's why Christian education cannot merely exist to help students make good grades and get into good colleges. Those things matter, but they are not ultimate. Christian education exists to help students see all of life through the truth of God. And we often refer to Deuteronomy 6 because it gives us a pretty clear picture of this. These words that I command you today shall be on your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your children. And we notice the language, it is diligent and it is continually and intentional. So biblical formation was never meant to be occasional. And yet one of the dangers facing Christian schools today, it's the temptation to become academically Christian, but spiritually shallow. We can accidentally create environments where students know Bible facts, but don't possess biblical wisdom, where they can pass theology tests, but can't discern truth from error, where they know Christian language, but have never truly learned to think Christianly. That's why worldview matters. That's why I did a whole series on this channel about what a worldview is. And we know just by simplicity that a worldview is simply the framework through which we interpret reality. And it answers all of the important questions. Who is God? What is truth? What is a human being? Why is the world broken? What's the purpose of life? And what does it mean to flourish? Every student has a worldview. The question is whether it's being shaped by Scripture or by culture. And here's something we all need to remember. Students often absorb worldview assumptions indirectly. Sometimes it's not what we explicitly say, it's what we normalize, what we celebrate, what we overlook, what we prioritize. Our classrooms communicate values all the time. And that's why Christian education, biblical education, is not merely curriculum management, it is discipleship. And discipleship requires intentionality. There's an old illustration involving inversion glasses. And you probably know about this. Researchers once gave people glasses that turned everything upside down. At first, they could barely function. They stumbled. They reached for objects and missed. Everything felt disoriented. But after several days, something pretty extraordinary happened. Their brains adapted. Upside down began to feel normal. And when the glasses were finally removed, reality itself felt wrong. And that's a powerful picture of our cultural moment. We're living in a world where many things God designed to be right side up have been turned upside down. Truth becomes preference, identity becomes self-created, morality becomes negotiable. And as students are immersed in that environment long enough without biblical grounding, eventually distortion begins to feel normal. And Christian educators help students see reality rightly again. So let me encourage you with this. Don't underestimate ordinary faithfulness. Every conversation matters. Every lesson matters. Every Moment matters. You may teach math, you may teach science, English, history, maybe a coach, music, but ultimately you're helping students learn to live under the lordship of Christ. Colossians 1 reminds us that all things were created through him and for him. That means every subject belongs to God. Truth belongs to God. Wisdom belongs to God. Reality belongs to God. And Christian education should help students see that. So, if you're weary, remember this. Faithful Christian education is kingdom work. You're not merely preparing students for graduation. You're helping prepare them for life, conviction, discernment, and faithfulness in a very, very confused world. And perhaps more than ever, the world desperately needs educators who teach with truth, with wisdom, courage, and grace. Thanks for joining me. I'm Bob Dyer with the Christian Educators Hub, and I'll see you in the next session of this series, Foundations of Faithful Teaching.